No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode and the next 4 episodes, we are going to be talking about the leadership dark side.
Yes, we are.
So as you might know as listeners, we get a lot of our content and a lot of our ideas from our own experience and from the things that we see online, the other leaders that we see, and that we try to take the good things from them and avoid the bad. And recently we came across another podcast. It's the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast. And one episode in particular kind of stuck out to us. And it's not a very recent episode, but the first time we listened to this, we kind of thought, wow, we wish we'd heard this a while ago, because it's some really great stuff. And we're going to focus on one episode here. And because there's so much content, we're actually breaking it up into 4 episodes. And so starting today and for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about the leadership dark side. There are 4 elements to the leadership dark side, according to Craig Groeschel. And those 4 elements are the controlling leader, the critical leader, the avoiding leader, and the rescuing leader. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the controlling leader. And so first, Lorenzo, have you ever reported to a controlling leader? As Craig Groeschel states, is someone who creates compliant followers. They develop their team into a crew of yes people who can't think for themselves. When you have controlling leaders, followers stay, and the organization stalls. Have you ever reported to a leader like that?
Yes, I have. And I'm doing everything in my power not to make a Star Wars joke because it's just too easy.
Yes.
But no, absolutely I have. And as you and I have discussed this content and talked about these things, the reality is that there are elements of each one of these leader types that I possess myself from time to time, and that either I have to
I think we all do.
Yeah, I have to be aware of or keep them in check. So 100% in reading the details of the controlling leader, which I know you're going to go over, in a minute here, I can immediately come to grips with a few names of leaders that I've worked for that pretty much define this style.
Okay, so the reason why I waited to describe the controlling leader as Craig Groeschel states is because I wanted our listeners to kind of think in their minds about people they've reported to that kind of fit this. And I think a lot of people might assume things about these types of leaders that might not be true. And so according to Craig Groeschel, the controlling leader is immature, insecure, or inexperienced. They don't understand that leadership is about influence, not control. But that doesn't mean that they don't have good intentions. They're often highly engaged, they care deeply. They just don't have trust, and they create a dysfunctional culture because of it. And I think that's really important because, at Hacking Your Leadership, we talk about assuming positive intent. This is the heart of that. If you report to a controlling leader, or if you are a controlling leader yourself, you find yourself kind of summoning this part of your dark side of leadership sometimes, it might mean that you can be both insecure and inexperienced, but you also care deeply, and you also are highly engaged and have great intentions. And so if you've reported to these people in the past, to assume that they are just insecure and inexperienced or immature is only half of the equation. You have to also, in order to deal with a controlling leader, or in order to kind of harness this in yourself and use it for good and not for bad, you have to assume that there are good intentions there and that these people are highly engaged and that they care deeply.
Yeah, it's funny because when we talk a lot about some of the pitfalls of people when they first become leaders or things to watch out for, and we've mentioned this before, but to me, most of the time, the controlling leader, when it's highly engaged, care deeply, but they're also immature, insecure, inexperienced, these are the times when that one person was a great individual contributor.
Oh, yes.
They were leading the team in results, and now they are the supervisor or the manager. And so the only thing that they can see is, well, here's how I've gotten my success. Here's how I was able to do it. And because I got rewarded with this promotion, I'm now going to make sure everybody else does exactly what I was doing.
Well, it must be the right way.
Right, it must be, right? Because I got the result and I got the promotion.
Right.
And so therefore, this is it. And so that's exactly what ends up happening. And I love that you paused on that because, again, they are often highly engaged and care deeply. I want to underline that because if you heard how Chris defined it from this podcast, and you go, oh, I know my leader right now is immature, insecure, and inexperienced. Well, if they're missing the highly engaged and care deeply piece, that's a whole different problem, right? Like that's just a not a good person,
Yeah.
and then also not a good leader, right? Many times to assume the positive intent, to have the dialogue, to look past how they're coming across in this controlling leader type, you really want to see is, if they are highly engaged and they care deeply, what can we do to help them versus, and maybe it is working with them for self-awareness or things like that. But that's where that's where I really think that these types of leaders fall into this place, is stepping into that leadership role where they can no longer just do the job themselves.
Right. Well, obviously it's about motivation. And so I think if you're a fairly intelligent person and you are being frustrated by a leader who seems to be a controlling leader, and they seem to come off like they're inexperienced or insecure, they have low self-esteem, and they're trying to control you because of it, it should be pretty easy to tell within a few interactions whether or not their motivation is actually to have you do things the way they want it done, or if their motivation is because they actually care about your development, they actually care about your growth and to see you succeed. They just don't know how to do it because they may have been promoted for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I like in the language that he uses is he says controlling leaders create compliant followers, and they develop their team into a crew of yes people who can't think for themselves. So what ends up happening now is you've got an entire team of people that seem to be at your beck and call, and they get frozen, they're unwilling to move, they want to hear from you on any decision. We've talked about this before previously in the podcast. As a leader, if you sit down in the meeting and you're the first person to talk, that really kind of shuts down everybody else's opinions, because you haven't had an opportunity for them to talk and share their opinions, because they're going to look at you as a leader and say, well, it's much easier to just fall in line and agree with what they're saying than voice my opinion and then either be told that I'm wrong, or that it's a bad call, or whatever the case is, or get the feedback in public. So I think that is, I just love that language and the specificity in which what happens as a result of leading this way.
Yeah, I think the controlling leader can often be validated by their own actions into thinking that they're doing the right thing too. Because what happens is if you're a controlling leader, and let's say you have 10 direct reports, some of those people will naturally engage and naturally thrive in an environment where they don't have autonomy and they don't make decisions on their own. There are some people out there who don't want to be decision makers. They want to be told what to do. They want to be pointed in a direction, and they want to walk in that direction until they're told to change. And if you want that, then that's the kind of organization you should lead, but that's all you're going to get. You're not going to anybody that thinks outside the box. You're not going to anybody who tries to solve problems any way besides the way you're telling them to solve problems. And so when you have this controlling leader, the people who don't respond to that, they leave. And the people who do respond that way, they engage highly, but they're not engaging in the way that you think. They're just listening to what you have to say. And so I think there are a lot of controlling leaders out there who over time, they create this culture, and it's a culture that seems to run well because those people listen to that leader. That controlling leader has kind of earned the right to lead them. They listen to them. Maybe the things they're being told to do are the right things to do. But that's where it stops. You're not going to grow. You're not going to be able to respond to problems because you're the only one who can if you're the controlling leader. And that's where the problems can occur, is when they talk about a dysfunctional culture. A dysfunctional culture might look fine in the short term. It will never be okay in the long term.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it's under the subject of this, this show here is the developer's dark side. So there can still be development happening. I spoke about this the other day on a Thoughtful Thursday of the thin line between development and delegation.
Right.
It's similar to this. Like, just because somebody is a controlling leader doesn't necessarily mean development's not happening. It means that it could really be slow and it could be stagnant. And like to your point, people can leave if they don't work well with that leader. But having a team of people that are just compliant and doing what you tell them to do, over time, they may get more efficient and more effective at those tasks tasks or at that job or in those behaviors. But it takes a lot longer for them to do that when they're not, feeling comfortable to take calculated risks, when they don't feel empowered to try some different types of things. And in this situation, when they're not pushing back with their thoughts or their ideas, when they are, in many instances, the closest to your consumer, your customer, or the people that, are a part of visiting your business or interacting with your team.
Yeah, one of the most important parts here, and this is if you're listening and you think that this is part of your dark side as being the controlling leader, you are hurting your own potential for upward mobility. Because one of the things that is the core elements of an environment led by a controlling leader is that other leaders leave that environment. And so I don't know many organizations where you're able to be promoted unless your replacement is ready to go. Most organizations don't want to promote somebody leaving this gaping hole where that team kind of falls apart in the absence of you. So if your team can't run without you, you're basically painting yourself into a corner where you're stuck leading that team. And so if that's not intentional, if you as a controlling leader have good intentions and you actually want to see people get developed and move up, ideally, you'd want to see somebody who's able to do your job as well or better than you, which will get you promoted. And that will never happen if this is the way you lead, because the people who would want to naturally move into that role and move up with the organization, they're going to leave and go somewhere else. And the people who stay will be ones who listen to you really well, but they could never take over your job.
As you were kind of talking through, I was reflecting on myself, or like, when has this shown up for me? When do I see myself, or when have I felt that I've done this or been this type of leader in certain situations? And where it is the, immature, insecure, or inexperienced. So there are times in my career where I have a lack of experience in a certain situation, whether it has been lessons around loss prevention or lessons around, business acumen or new things that are now being added to the expectations of the role of the leader. And there's been times where in my inexperience, I've had to look and say, okay, hold on, let me get my hands around this. Let me be really clear about how I want this team to do this. Let me be, let me double check and follow it. Let me show them what I want. Let me tell them this is the only path we're going down. And that's where, in essence, I've kind of directed into, being compliant and just follow me in what I'm saying. I think over time, what I learned is if you have the ability to build the trust and a culture and an environment where you mostly empower your team, when you allow them to go with their ideas, when you spend more time in the model of helping support them on what they're working on, as long as it's down the right path of the priorities, you now have the ability to say, hey, this is something new for all of us. And so what I'm going to ask is that we follow this plan. Here's the decision that's been made, and this is what I want you to go all do. And if I'm wrong here, or this is not going to work, we will discuss it. We'll make adjustments to it. We can talk about it. But what I'm asking you to do right now is be compliant and do exactly what I'm saying. So for me, that's probably when I see the controlling leader element kind of creep up, is when I fall into something where I have inexperience and I need to kind of like build my self-confidence, or at least make a decision that I feel is the right decision, and then allow the learning to happen as we move forward in executing the plan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking about the first time I was promoted, and you talk about inexperience. That's exactly what it was. I was promoted for the wrong reasons, and I was a teenager still, and the controlling leader came out in me, not because that was my natural go-to, but because I was trying to validate my right to be there. In my own head, I was thinking, I need to make sure I'm doing this right. And when you are inexperienced at doing something, when I was inexperienced at doing something, and still to this day, if I'm in a situation where I don't really know what I'm doing, this can come out, because what I'm trying to do in my own head is think, if people won't follow me, then that means I'm in the wrong spot. I shouldn't be here. And it's very easy to fall into a trap where you're defining leadership as, do your people do what you tell them to do? And I think that's where the problem happens, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it becomes self-validating to the controlling leader to think, okay, I'm doing it right because my people are listening to what I have to say and following me. That's so just the first 6 inches of the surface. If underneath that's all they're doing, then that's where the problem happens. And so oftentimes, we talk about trying to surround ourselves with people who challenge us as a very, very important part of leadership. If you find yourself thinking that the good people on your team are the ones who are compliant, and the ones that are the troublemakers are the ones that are challenging you, you might be a controlling leader. And that might be a litmus test for that. If you find yourself liking to spend more time in developing the people who are pushing back on you, then the controlling leader might not be part of your developer's dark side.
Yeah, and it's funny because as you were talking about it, it's right here, like leaders leave, followers stay, right? So what ends up happening is, your role as a leader, and what we see and what we hear and what we talk about is like your role as a leader is to create more leaders. If you're creating more followers, you're actually making it more difficult for, your team to grow collectively and create a cultured environment where people are accelerating through their own developments. And that's not what you want. Like you definitely want followers of people that trust you, but what you want is followers who choose to follow you, not followers who have to follow you.
Yeah, it's earning the right to lead. And we talk about that all the time, but you have to earn the right to lead. There are people with titles who only lead because they have that title. And there are people without titles who end up being able to move organizations and move cultures much stronger than those with the title because they've earned it. And they earned it by the care and the time they take to develop those around them. And that is independent of title. They are completely mutually exclusive. And so the controlling leader really has to rely on their title to be able to lead. The controlling leader will have a much harder time leading their peers or leading people who don't report directly to them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
Okay, this episode's 1 Minute Hack is a little bit about reflection. I want you to get out your pen and paper. I want you to sit down for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I want you to think back over the last month or two and write down any specific examples you can think of where someone reporting to you pushed back on you. They told you were wrong, or they told you that you could have done things differently or that you should do things differently in any way, whether it was respectful or less than respectful, any type of pushback at all. Write down those examples. And who did them. If you can't think of any, then the controlling leader is part of your developer's dark side. If you can think of a lot, if the page goes on and on and on, then you might have different problems on this team, but being a controlling leader is not necessarily one of them. And so this is the right balance. Sometimes controlling leaders have to be able to leverage the fact that they are the boss and they have to get things done. But if you can't find balance in that, and if your people are not pushing back on you, it means they don't feel like they can. So make sure you always have examples that you can think of readily about times your people have pushed back on you on how you're leading or how you're doing things. And if you can't, this is a problem.
Yeah, it's a great 1 minute hack. And, it's super important as a leader if you're looking to build environments and culture of trust and transparency and growth together, that you can not only write those examples down, but that you take the opportunity to share them. And you let your larger teams know and your leadership teams know that, hey, let me talk to you about where I got some feedback or pushback or where I thought I had a great idea and actually it wasn't. And like, you want to share these types of things if you're looking to build an environment where you can empower people and where you are developing leaders and not just followers.
Yeah, if you're doing some self-reflection here and you're thinking that the controlling leader might be part of your developer's dark side, then I promise you, your direct reports, your team also thinks it. And so if you can come out in front of it and say, this is something that you know is a part of being a leader, but you also know that you want to make sure you keep it in check and that it doesn't become all of who you are, just acknowledging the issue exists with your direct reports can go a long way to getting them to help you. To say, you know what, it might seem like I don't want you to push back on me sometimes, but I promise you I do. And if I'm reacting poorly or if I don't seem to take it well, call me out on that because it's something I'm trying to work on. That kind of vulnerability with your team goes a long way. And it actually buys you time if you're trying to work on this inside yourself. Your team will be a lot more sympathetic to that, and they'll give you a lot more leeway if they can see that it's something you're working on with them.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.